We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
In 1996, director Roland Emmerich and star Bill Pullman gave the world an explosive foray into third-kind encounters and how awesome America can truly be.
In 2024, we try one of the most contentious bourbons on the market.
The film is Independence Day.
The whiskey is Willett Pot Still Reserve.
And we'll review them both. This is the Film and Whiskey Podcast.
Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And Brad, there has never been a better time to be an American, because today we are talking about perhaps the most American movie ever made, 1996's Independence Day. A film that for a time, and that time, you know, in parentheses, that time is when I was 7 years old, but for a time was my favorite film ever made.
I believe it, man. It's a hell of a movie.
It's so good, dude. It's so good, and it's also so bad. And I don't think I've ever watched this movie through the critical lens that I watch movies on this podcast. And I turned it on this time, and I was like, oh, this is like truly bad at parts. And also, I am having a complete blast watching this movie. It's so good.
I'm glad that you've come to that place, Bob. Otherwise, this may have been a very contentious episode. Because I think that we're just going to be on opposite ends of the bell curve. Like, if you're in like the 70th percentile of people who love this movie, I think I might be in like the 30th, 40th, where I'm like, the parts that work in this movie, I do enjoy, and they're ridiculous and over the top and funny. But a solid 50 to 70% of this film could have been left on the cutting room floor.
I'll tell you what, man, I think you're being very generous, because if you truly believe that 70% of the movie should have been cut, that signals a pretty bad movie to me.
It could have been a short film.
All right, well, as we get into our episode today, I just want to say, if this is your first time joining us, don't leave yet. I'm going to praise Independence Day. As we all know, it should be done.
You never know, Bob. That might drive some people away.
That's true. Well, you can hear Brad talk about the 30% that worked. If this is your first time joining us, welcome into Film and Whiskey. What we do here is we talk about movies and we talk about whiskey. And this season, we're changing things up a little bit. Not that we're replacing films or whiskey, but typically we look at movies that are considered classics of their
books and wine.
Books and wine. Yes. Typically we look at movies that are considered classics of their genre. And I mean, perhaps Independence Day is considered a classic of some genre. But this year, what we're doing is we're going year by year from 1988 to 2019 and looking at the highest grossing films of those years. Now, Brad, remind me, is Independence Day actually the number one highest grossing film of 96?
I don't believe it is.
See, I thought it might have been, because
Let me look.
Okay. And while you look, I'll keep vamping. But every now and then we run into this situation where we're not actually watching the highest grossing film because we've already reviewed that. But we are looking at huge blockbuster moneymakers. And Independence Day, in a lot of ways, kind of exemplifies the summer blockbuster of the 1990s. This movie was a money printing machine, and I feel like it's one of those movies that it didn't really have much of a footprint at the Oscars or anything like that, but everyone in America saw this movie, and I remember it being just absolutely everywhere when we were kids. So I'm excited to dive into this one, Brad. What are you getting on this one?
Well, the IMDb is only showing domestic. It's not showing foreign take. So according to IMDb's 1996 worldwide box office, this is the number one grossing film.
We did it.
With 306 million. Followed by Twister and Mission Impossible.
What a freaking year.
Yeah. Jerry Maguire at 4. Ransom at 5. 101 Dalmatians at 6. Look at that.
Well, we had a good top 5 at least.
Yeah. Hey,
Brad,
I've never heard of Ransom.
It's a Mel Gibson movie where his kid gets taken and he kills a lot of people. It's freaking great.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like there's a theme here.
Have you seen Twister?
I've not seen Twister.
They're making a sequel to it. I just saw the commercial during the Super Bowl. It has Glenn Powell. I'm very excited for Glenn Powell plus tornadoes.
Glenn Powell's your rags to riches hope story for a new superstar, movie star.
I know. He had to overcome looking like that to become the movie star that he is now.
Speaking of sequels, I have very important news for you, Bob.
Oh, what's that, Brad? I
have finally gotten around to watching the film you've begged me to watch for 3 years now. I watched Denis' Dune.
Ooh. You know what else is even bigger news? In the last 3 days, I too have watched Denis' Dune.
Have you now?
Yeah.
Are you getting ready for Dune 2?
I am, yeah. There's a screening coming up in like a week. I'm very, very excited for it. I wanted to refresh myself. Interesting movie, Brad, because I saw it in the theater and it was like mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I saw it on the small screen and I was like, I really like when filmmakers take sci-fi seriously. And you can tell the scope and the scale of this movie is massive, and the shot composition is designed for a 40-foot wall with an image projected on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite translate as well on the small screen. I came out of this one like, that was like a 7.5. And when I saw it in the theater, I was like, that's an 8.5.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was.
Yeah.
I want to see Dune 2 in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
It also made me want to read the books. It gave me just enough to pique my interest. I think the biggest problem with Dune was just that they got caught into the trap of world building, and they didn't lean into what Lord of the Rings does and help you fall in love with the characters. And I think that was my biggest problem with it, is like Oscar Isaac is busy dying, and I'm kind of like, meh. Like, I don't really care about him at all. Like, all of the characters in this movie are unlikable. And the action is great. And, like, the world building is pretty cool. Like, there's these creepy witches, and there's a bunch of different houses, and there's an unseen emperor that's apparently going to be played by Christopher Walken, which led to no end of ridiculous imitations of what the emperor would be saying as Christopher Walken. But yeah, it was a good time. Had a good time with friends. Overall, was somewhat unimpressed with the film as a whole, but it's a Denis. Like the floor for that film is a 7, and like you said, in theaters, I can easily go, yeah, that's an 8 to 9 out of 10 movie in theaters.
Well, see, Brad, the thing is, when you talk about how that movie failed to do world building right, you forgot to mention that the alternative to a world building movie is a movie where aliens come and just blow up your world. And that's what we have today. And that's why Independence Day, hot take, better than Dune.
I feel like that is a hot take.
It is also not my take, but I think that means that it is time for us to get into our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the film that he has just seen, often for the first time. Brad, this was your first time with Independence Day, right?
Sure was, yeah.
You were talking about the bell curve of enjoyment. I also think you're on the other end of the bell curve for me in terms of age at which you first watched this movie.
Oh, yes.
And therefore the effectiveness of this movie.
Yes. You also gave me like an education of 250 plus films before I watched this. So if there's anybody to blame for me being a little bit meh on the movie, it's your fault.
It's ultimately me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking a bit ago about sequels. This movie did get a sequel back in oh gosh, I don't know, 2014, 2017. It was so forgettable that I have no idea when it came out. And I never saw that movie. So when you brought up sequels, I was like, wow, did you go watch the sequel to this movie? Because you would have outdone me on doing your homework on this film.
I sure did not. Was Will Smith in that?
I don't believe so. I know Jeff Goldblum was, but
okay,
but not Big Willie. So.
Yeah, I will say my biggest surprise about Independence Day 1, the original, because I didn't even know there was a second one. My biggest surprise was that I feel like I always had the image of this movie that this was like a Will Smith blockbuster. When in all reality, he was just kind of one cog in the machine, one piece of the puzzle. I was very surprised by how little he was in the film.
Well, it's time for you to explain that machine and the cogs within it, because you have 1 minute on the clock to spoil this film, and go.
So there weren't any aliens. And then there were, and they wanted to kill everybody, and we couldn't stop them. But then Jeff Goldblum can do some crazy math stuff, and now we can stop them, and we blow them up because they suck, and we're awesome.
And why are we awesome, Brad?
Because we're America.
That's right,
Let's
baby.
go, dude.
All right, that's good enough. Let's jump into the movie itself. So I want to start just kind of from the beginning and work through this thing in the order that it is presented to us. So it starts with an image of the moon, and you see the memorial that Neil Armstrong set up, and then all of a sudden, a shadow creeps across the face of the moon. And what a freaking great way to start this movie.
Incredible opening. Like, first off, you failed to mention that the opening, like, titles explode.
As every film in the 90s did.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's no hiding what this movie is about.
No, it's about watching shit get blown up, Brad. So, okay, the movie starts with this moon thing, and very, very quickly, it gets into the meat of the movie. Like, you have the aliens showing up in these giant fireballs in the sky and starting to position their ships over major cities around the world. And we are introduced to a few groups of people in different cities. So you've got the Jeff Goldblum character in New York City. He is like the main tech guy at a cable company in the 90s. You've got Will Smith and his girlfriend and her son out in California. Will Smith is it an Air Force pilot? Like what?
They continually refer to him as a Marine.
A Marine,
He's
okay.
a Marine pilot.
Got it. Okay. So he's off base, but he's watching this whole thing unfold over the, skyline of Los Angeles. And then you've got Bill Pullman and his circle in Washington, D.C. Bill Pullman is the president of the United States. And boy, oh boy.
Can we also just clearly say he is very obviously banging his assistant. That, like, Jeff Goldblum is nervous about them having an affair. Like, they're very obviously having an affair.
He was right to be nervous. Is that what we're saying? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I was going to end my little thing about, triangulating all these three things by saying, boy, oh boy, is it crazy how much these three groups of people overlap throughout this movie.
Yeah, and it's wild.
And I'm going to be honest with you, man. I think that the first 30 to 35 minutes of this movie are almost perfectly plotted and set up and like rhythmically they move you through each of these groups of people. Like, I started watching this movie and I had to turn it off for a couple hours, and I stopped like right about the 35 minute mark. And the aliens had not yet blown anything up, but I was like, they're really doing a good job of building the suspense and the dread and the sort of ominous thing going on here. And I'm learning about these characters. And I will say that just in the next 15 minutes, like, the aliens are going to blow something up because Jeff Goldblum tells you the countdown is on. And then he tries to get in touch with his ex-wife, who we find out is the press secretary at the White House or something thereabouts.
Who's totally not sleeping with the president.
Not sleeping with the president, but wink, wink. And so then you get this side quest where Jeff Goldblum has to go to Washington, D.C. because he wants to save his wife and also tell the president about all this stuff. And I will say, like, as soon as that side quest starts, the next 15 minutes of the movie almost could have just been cut out, dude. Like,
but what are you talking about, Bob? You get Judd Hirsch being the most Jewish Jew that has ever been a Jew.
Like, offensively so.
Yep.
But also, okay, so like, the aliens start blowing stuff up. I paused it. 42 minutes and 40 seconds.
Sure.
Which is like a good chunk of the way into the movie.
Yeah, I would say it is a really long movie. And I think if you cut out 30 minutes and you put that back about 15, get the aliens blowing stuff up 30 minutes in, I think you have a hell of a movie.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I actually thought that it was perfectly plotted up till 30 minutes. And from 30 to 42, it lost me. And I'm a guy who is like very firmly in the Independence Day camp. It lost me. And I was like, I made a mental note because I knew in my mind, Brad's going to think this drags here. And if you know, whether you did or not, I'm going to tell you, Brad, you are right. It does drag there.
Thanks, man. I appreciate when you tell me that I'm right for things that I never even told
that
you
I just assume about you. Yeah.
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with pacing throughout the entire film. I think there's definitely moments where you spend time with characters that I just don't care about. I also think that they give you just enough time in the opening sequences of the film with certain like secondary characters that end up dying off, just enough to get you to like them. And specifically, I am thinking of Harvey Fierstein, who plays Marty, who has probably the most distinct voice in Hollywood history.
Oh, yeah.
Like, as soon as you hear his voice, you're like, oh, I know him. I don't know what his name is. I mean, I just had to look it up. But he is probably my favorite character. I wish they had killed everyone else off. Like, they could have killed Jeff Goldblum off and I would have been fine. Keep Harvey Fierstein alive. And I just want to see, like, a Cloverfield style. Somehow he gets a hold of a handheld cam and, like, records his experience of Independence Day. But overall, they keep the right people alive, and by the time you get to the ending action, you're kind of ready for everything to be over, and so that last bit of action really flies through.
Yeah.
But you're right, the middle 40-50% of the film, it's a lot, man. There's a lot of cheesy acting, bad dialogue.
Well, and I'm trying to think of exactly how to like format the way we talk about it. But I think the first place I want to start is, you know, in this first third of the movie, because the movie is divided up into July 2nd, July 3rd, July 4th. And each of those days has a very distinct flavor to it in terms of what kind of movie this is trying to be. And so the first day is very much your like 1970s disaster movie, which we've never really talked about a movie like that on this podcast, Brad, but there was a huge genre in the 70s. There's a movie called Airport that kind of kicked things off, and then you had like the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. They were all these movies where like something horrible happens and we got 45 A to B list actors to be in this movie, and you're going to watch people that you know and love burn to death, and you never know like who's next.
Would that be like, would Flight of the Phoenix fall into that category?
Probably a little bit, but like these were more built around like a giant, you know, disaster happening where everybody mostly dies.
Yeah. I remember seeing the Poseidon when I was a kid and loving that movie.
So I think in that vein, this movie is like really paying homage to that. I don't know like the extent to which it succeeds at that, but I think the secondary and tertiary characters, I think this script does a really good job of setting them up with minimal exposition to make you like them. Like the Harvey Fierstein character, I really liked him. But then like some of the primary characters, it's like they go overboard with the backstory. And I think that's like the Jeff Goldblum character. I'm gonna be honest with you, man. Like I just don't care that much. Like, and you could have accomplished what you want to accomplish with like 4 less scenes in that first 45 minutes.
Oh, all you needed was the opening scene with him playing chess with his dad.
Right.
Like,
but even like the
incredible scene.
Even if you want to continue my wife works for the president now, you didn't have to have like 5 scenes of them on their little road trip talking about like what it means to be a man and regret and like just like I want to watch aliens blow things up. Let's please move this along.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's what I'm saying. Like the chess scene was great. It was sweet. It established what their relationship is with each other. I also don't feel like you needed the like Green Earth warrior message coming out of Jeff Goldblum's mouth. Like, that felt like an extra 12 seconds every time he does that shtick. And it added up.
They were trying to get their product placement in because he was like standing next to a Fruitopia vending machine.
Yeah.
Like,
and like having cans of Coca-Cola everywhere.
Yeah.
It was not my favorite because it added up to a solid 4 or 5 minutes of screen time of him recycling things.
Yeah.
Okay, I could have had that time back to do other things with my life.
So I say all that about the characters that get set up well because there is a fourth group of characters that I have not talked about at all yet. And they don't, like, they seem very set apart from the rest. And that is Randy Quaid as crazy town drunk who flies a biplane and crop dusts. And his...
Also was abducted by aliens
Yes.
10 years ago.
Abducted by aliens. The town crackpot and his 3 children who are riding across, the deserts of California in an RV, and they really want this to be comic relief, and then they want him to have a redemption arc at the end of the movie, and it does not work. The only part of this character that works, and folks, forgive me for spoiling a nearly 30-year-old movie here, is when he sacrifices himself at the end of the movie, and they let him go out still being crazy. Like, it's not overly sentimental. He just shouts, "Hello, boys, I'm back." And then you get what is no exaggeration, one of the 10 best explosions in the history of films when that freaking ship blows up.
Yeah.
It's great, but I don't need Randy Quaid in any more of the movie than just that one part.
No, it should have been the president. The president should have sacrificed himself for the good of the world. And they all draw around the memory of this great hero. He's, top 3 president of all time. Like, that's the... Come on, Bob, you and I should start writing scripts.
I know. Now, if we're going to talk about the ending of this movie and whether it works, we have to get there. So, July 2nd, the aliens arrive. Everybody's freaked out. Will Smith reports to base. The president is putting stuff on lockdown and trying not to get people freaked out. Jeff Goldblum's driving to Washington to have domestic drama inside the White House with his ex-wife. And then... the aliens attack. And the most iconic sequence of this movie starts where that building in Los Angeles blows up, the Empire State Building blows up, the White House blows up. It freaking rules.
Oh, yeah.
It is. And I'm going to be honest with you, Brad, there's only a few stretches of this movie where some of the effects look hokey. I will say that the actual attack of the aliens, it holds up tremendously well almost 30 years later.
Yeah, that's probably one of the few special effects area that looks great. I thought that the shot of the Statue of Liberty and the surprisingly prescient burnt out husks of the 2 towers.
Yes.
That shot was incredible.
Yep.
Talk about a devastated America. That's it in one shot.
Mm-hmm.
And they nail it. And so there's so much of that initial attack that you can tell where they put the budget in this movie, and it wasn't on the scriptwriters.
I do want to talk just for a minute, since we're on topic now. This is a pre-9/11 movie in which an invading force knocks out national landmarks and wreaks destruction and kills thousands of people. And in this movie, it's millions, but
which also leads to peace in the Middle East.
True.
So at the end of the film, the Iraqis and I think the British,
they're all working together, man.
Yeah, they're working together, man. It's great.
So a pre-9/11 movie where this happens. And I was thinking, this seems very unique, right? But actually, that's not the case. In the 90s, there was a lot of movies where buildings were getting knocked over, and even Godzilla, the crappy 90s remake of that. But I don't think there's any more, I don't know, what's the analogous thing to 9/11 than Independence Day in 90s cinema. We'll see a little bit of that in Armageddon, the beginning of that movie, in a couple weeks here. It's really interesting, man. And it's weird to watch with a post 9/11 lens, because I feel like when stuff like this happens now, there's a lot of superhero movies now where they will destroy a city in the final fight of the movie. And a criticism of that genre is always you can't just flippantly kill thousands of people anymore in a post 9/11 world. It just reads, it feels icky, right?
Yeah.
And I think we didn't feel icky about this in the 90s because it hadn't happened in real life yet. But there is a part of me that wonders, like, does America's response to 9/11, is it inflected with movies like this where somebody attacks us and we immediately attack back, and like that's what America does? Do you know, like it's very weird to think about what actually ends up unfolding in real history as a result of, or maybe not a direct result of, but you know, in the wake of movies like this that came before it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because there are a lot of films still to this day that represent America as like a trigger-happy, reactionary nation. Mm-hmm. Like I'm even thinking about the monster universe. Like if you watch the first Godzilla from like, I don't know, 2013, 2014.
Oh, yeah.
Like Godzilla comes and our first response is to nuke him. Mm-hmm. Like that's the immediate response. So I think you still see that in media. I was curious about the fact that they don't actually portray America as trigger happy in this film.
No.
Like for the longest time, the president is trying to communicate. I don't know if this is an homage, but it seems like an homage to Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm-hmm. When they send up the helicopter with the
the light displays and trying to communicate. And I do like that the director and script writers are like, we're not messing around with like, are we here for diplomatic relations? The first time they try to communicate with the aliens shoot them down without mercy. Like there's nothing in there. And even later in the film, when they kind of quasi talk to an alien, in a sequence that kind of reminds me of Alien. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. When they talk to him there, it's like there's nothing going on there. We are here to destroy your world. End of story.
Yep.
And they make it so obvious that they need to retaliate that they retaliate.
Right. And that's the thing.
That is like an interesting take.
And because they portray America as so justified in doing it too. You know what I mean? Like,
right. We had no other choice.
Right. So anyway, I don't want to go down that road or open that can of worms, but it's an interesting document now post 9/11.
Yeah. Oh, and I will say, like, watch it. It's always interesting to examine cultural artifacts, partially just for our own emotional response. Like when I'm watching this and I see the burning husk of 9/11, when I see the burning husk of the two towers in the scene following the devastation of New York, like I got a little emotional, Bob.
100%,
like,
man.
I remember being 11 years old and seeing the Twin Towers collapsing. Like there was a part of me that was like, crap, this is bringing something up. Anyways.
So there's a fade to black on July 2nd after all these cities get absolutely annihilated. We fade up on July 3rd. There's going to be a counteroffensive. We're going to send some fighter pilots up there and see what damage we can do. And this is really where like the bulk of the movie's exposition starts, because the first third is like, we don't know anything about them and we're operating solely based on fear and survival instinct. And the second day of the movie is where the movie really drags, Brad. Like middle third, there's some great sequences. Like I think that everything that happens with Will Smith is well done. Like the fighter pilot stuff, the chase through the canyons, punching an alien in the face and saying, "Welcome to Earth." This is a star-making performance for Will Smith. And he was, perhaps the biggest actor on TV outside of Bill Cosby with The Fresh Prince. He does Bad Boys in 1995. That's a big hit, but he had not cemented his movie star credentials. And then this movie comes out, and you're right, dude. Like, it's remembered as a Will Smith movie. Yep. He is not even, like, I don't even think he's in the movie as much as Bill Pullman is.
No.
And so, like, it says a whole lot about the charisma that my guy was bringing to the screen in 1996, that not only do we remember it as a Will Smith movie, but it just absolutely catapults him into the A-list pretty much immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Bill Pullman, as an actor, is somebody that I've never heard of, Bob. So
he's been in a lot of movies, but he was never, outside of this, his biggest role ever is probably like he was the lead in Spaceballs, like the Mel Brooks movie.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
That's funny. I didn't make that connection.
And I feel like, we haven't really talked about performances much, so let's sprinkle some in here. Bill Pullman when I was a kid, I was like, that's a president. And now I watch it and I'm like, that's a guy trying to do a Clint Eastwood gruff voice. And I don't know why he's doing that voice the whole movie. And I don't know that this is a good performance.
Yeah, it's not a great performance. It would honestly be probably my least favorite performance from the main kind of characters in the film. If not for the fact that he like transforms into like, I don't know, like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men and just gives a speech to beat all speeches at the end of the film.
All right. No, we'll get there. We're on day 2 right now. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Will Smith's whole thing happens. What's going on in this part of the movie too is like, it's kind of your classic trilogy. They're trying to do a whole trilogy in one movie. Like something happens at the end of the first movie that leaves you wanting more. In the second film, our heroes are like truly laid low. And you think that we're laid low after the first day where all of our cities are bombed. But then on the second day, we try nuking the ship and nothing works. We get this extended sequence in Area 51, which really that whole sequence kind of sucks. But like you get a great tip into horror for a minute where a live alien communicates the intentions of the aliens to the president. And then
through the vocal cords of a dead human being.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And then that section of the movie ends with personal loss. Like the president's wife dies. The first lady dead on July 3rd.
Can I please just comment on that for one quick second?
Please.
The president's wife dies. Why? Because the plot needs her to die.
She needs to die. Yeah, that's exactly why.
That's like literally what the doctor says. He's like, isn't there anything you can do? And the doctor just kind of shrugs his shoulders and is like, well, she doesn't have plot armor, so...
If she'd gotten here sooner. Yeah, but like, what's wrong? Well, she just didn't get here soon enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So she dies. You have a cute kid saying, is mommy sleeping? Oh, the waterworks are on, Brad. But
not just a cute kid who has been in another movie in the Film and Whiskey history.
Oh, who is this?
Her name is Mae Whitmore, I believe.
Okay.
She is in Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh, yeah. Is it Mae Whitman? I think it's Whitman. That's her?
Yes. Yeah, that's Mae Whitman, man.
Oh, that's
the
crazy.
president's daughter.
Man.
Yeah, and she's like kind of a minor character in a bunch of films.
Okay, we're running long here, so let's put day 3 after the break. But before we wrap this up here, I want to talk about why I think the middle section of this movie sucks so much, Brad, and it is because this is where they start forcing these characters' stories to overlap. Randy Quaid meets Will Smith, and Vivica A. Fox meets the First Lady, and Jeff Goldblum and the President are already hanging out, and it's like, do we need every one of these groups of people to have multiple layers of interaction in each other's lives? Because it kind of just seems like we're doing Crash, but with aliens for a while.
Yep.
And that does not work. Like, I don't care about the human drama here. Like, aliens blow stuff up, we blow up the aliens. That's needs to be the plot here.
I was thinking like is it New Year's Eve? The movie where there's like 80 different stars in it and they all have overlapping lives. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I was thinking as I watched this. I was like, oh, it's a action New Year's Eve.
But crucially with aliens.
With aliens. Aliens that, if I'm being honest, the inside aliens aren't great. The alien that kills all the people in the lab,
the exoskeleton,
right?
One of the
terrifying.
Coolest designs. Yes, and I think that if there's a scene that we could talk about, it is this scene where Will Smith punches an alien in the head and it is unconscious for hours. Apparently,
he's got a hell of a right hook
until they get him down into the operating room and they are cutting off this like exoskeleton that the aliens use, and you start to see, the fingers are moving. And it's one of the great horror tropes of like, you are trapped in a room with a thing that's going to kill everybody in the room. Like, this is the Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2 kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, it is completely out of left field because the rest of the movie does not have this tone at all. But I will say it's still effective.
Sure is, man. And even like when the rest of the group comes to the lab and the lab is covered in smoke and you can't see anything, the camera's like slowly zooming and like pushing in on the window. And I'm like, oh yeah, one of the dead bodies is going to get shoved up against the window. And it's going to happen right about now. Oh crap.
And it still gets you. Yeah. All right, man. I think we're in a good spot to press pause. This is a fun episode so far. I really love talking about this movie, but I'm ready to dive into more contentious ground. So let's talk a little bit about this Willett Pot Still. What do you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. Pot Still.
Pot Still.
I'm ready, Bob. Let's do it.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
All right, so today we are checking out Willett Pot Still Reserve. Brad, I've already mentioned it a couple times. I've said that this is a contentious whiskey. I guess I'll just put it straight to you. Were you aware that this was a contentious whiskey? And like, what do you know about it?
I would say yes. I know that the vibes on this whiskey are really harsh. And when I say vibes, I mean like genuinely people's thoughts. That this is something people either seem to really love or really hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had the impression that it was an expensive whiskey. And maybe that's because I had heard about it 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I'll spoil the value, not my score, but it's about a $50 bottle of whiskey, Bob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it definitely did experience a spike during the peak of the bourbon boom. But then there is enough ill will towards this whiskey out there that like it market corrected itself. It's like one of the few ones that has kind of come back down into a reasonable range.
Yeah. And I don't know. Do you know if it's like really hard to find, even though it's at 50-ish on the secondary?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that this is like as available as regular Buffalo Trace.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like it's kind of allocated, but not really.
Yep.
So this is from, obviously, the Willett Distillery. Willett started making this, I believe, back in 2008. It was originally introduced as a single barrel whiskey. And then in 2011 or 2012, they kind of, on the hush-hush, swapped out the labels to say small batch. They said that at no point were the batches any larger than 12 barrels. So it's a true small batch whiskey. This was not something that was being distilled by Willett because Willett didn't distill whiskey for a long, long time. And so it was always a fun game people played to try to figure out where this whiskey came from. Most people thought it was from Heaven Hill. I do have it on very good authority, Brad, that this is actually being made 100% by the Willett Distillery now that they have their operations up and running, and that it does, in fact, use a pot still in its distillation. So one of the big knocks on this whiskey, because if you've ever seen the bottle of whiskey is shaped like a pot still. It is a very cool, albeit gimmicky bottle.
Yeah. I don't care if it's gimmicky. It's a really cool bottle. It's cool. Bob.
Yeah, like I have nothing against it. I just, for a long time, people said, we don't actually know if there's a pot still involved in the production of this whiskey or if they just put it in a bottle shaped like a pot still and then called it pot still whiskey.
That's involving a pot still. It's a pot still replica.
Made of glass, sure.
Yeah, made of glass that holds the whiskey.
But again, I can say, as far as I know, 2024, it is being 100% made by Willett, and it does use a pot still in the distillation process. So, on that note, let me say this. It's 94 proof. We do not know the exact mash bill on it, but it's suspected to be Willett's wheated mash bill. Brad, I'm pretty excited to dive into this. It's been years since I've tried this thing.
Yeah, I tried it at some point with, I believe, my friend who gave this to us, Wes. So thank you, Wes.
Thanks, Wes.
Yeah, what a guy. I'm excited as well. My notes on it, honestly, are very interesting. I landed at an interesting place, and I'm excited for us both to get there. For me, the nose was decent. It was satisfactory. It didn't blow me away.
Mm-hmm.
I got some vanilla cake, kind of like a really dark raspberry, And then like, I'm going to use a different phrase because I don't want to use this phrase. I'll let you take over it.
I do have it trademarked.
I'm going to call it Dusty Attic. That's the note I got on the nose. Overall, a decent nose. I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
My first note, Brad, that I wrote down was the Willett freaking funk.
Not just the Willett funk.
Dude, I don't know how they do it because like for so long they were sourcing this whiskey and now they're making it themselves and their whiskey still smells exactly the same. Like about season 6 or so, season 5 maybe, we finally pinpointed what the funk is, and it's not actually funk, it's like rose petal. There's just a ton of rose on this, and it's here, man. It's here in spades, but there was also this really weird note that I got underneath it, and it was like burnt paper. It wasn't like char, it wasn't ash, it wasn't cigarette or tobacco or anything. It's like when you accidentally like catch a piece of paper on fire. There's a very specific smell to the way that burns.
Is this a common occurrence for you, Bob?
You know, listen, man, when I get top secret messages, you got to burn those things with fire.
All your Mission Impossible messages that self-destruct.
So it was just a really weird thing to have underneath those layers of rose. And I couldn't tell if it was tipping me off to something bad coming. But in a vacuum, it wasn't a bad nose. It was just like, I'm going to take note. You know what I mean? So I'll give it a 7 out of 10 on the nose.
The palate here, I got a really interesting note of, I don't know if you've been overseas much, Bob. I haven't. But the one time I was, they had cherry juice in Ukraine. And it was incredible. And I got a very distinct vibe of like a really fresh, juicy cherry juice.
Oh, interesting.
There was some Coca-Cola notes. There's a little bit of like a salted caramel. I got some like really salty peanuts. All of that might make it sound like I liked this whiskey. I was just okay with it.
I was too.
I came to a 6.5 out of 10 on the palate.
I did too.
It's interesting and unique. I just don't know if I like it or not.
I think the most controversial thing I'm going to say about this whiskey on this review is that almost every category was middle of the road for me. I neither loved it nor hated it. And for a whiskey to be so divisive, I was really expecting super bold, prominent flavors.
Yep.
And for me, I'm actually kind of envious that you picked up on so much because, you know, Brad, I just got over a cold like a week ago. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, should I be COVID testing? Because I didn't taste any of these things that Brad tasted. In fact, for me, I was like, this has a surprising lack of flavor when compared to other Willett products. Like, it was kind of non-existent flavor-wise at the front of my palate. And it wasn't until the middle and the back part of my palate that I started picking up anything. I feel like the mouthfeel and the experience of drinking it was really pleasant, and it drank like an expensive whiskey. Like it grows really nicely. It builds on the palate. There's good spice here. The alcohol is never harsh, but it leaves a nice little layer of like a prickly effect when you go to swallow. But it just reminded me of Noah's Mill, which I love so much. But if you took all of the sweetness out of Noah's Mill, it had some char to it. It wasn't bitter. It was just kind of bland compared to other Willett products that I've had. On my second sip, I got a little bit of like a, almost like a blended Scotch kind of flavor. It definitely didn't taste like a wheated bourbon to me, like at all. So I just gave it a 6.5. And then on the finish, like I said, it has a nice chest burn, like a really good oak base. It's perfectly fine. And I think it would make a really good cocktail because it has everything you need, like that a whiskey needs to announce itself with in a mixed drink. But just it doesn't have flavors to stand up on its own. It's almost like a super high quality mixer. So I gave it a 6.5 there as well.
That's so funny, man. On my finish, the first note I took, it took me a little bit to get to it, but it reminded me of like the egg white that we put in a whiskey sour. And not that I like ever like just eat or drink just egg whites, but for some reason that's what I couldn't get out of my brain, like that specific texture of an egg white mixed in with your whiskey sour. That's what I was getting. There was black pepper, there was tobacco. It got kind of ashy for me after it sat on my palate for a little bit. I actually think I liked the finish better than anything else. I gave it a 7.5 on the finish. Balance-wise, I gave it a 6 out of 10, Bob. It's just such a weird mix of flavors. And I don't think it's bad. It's just so strange. I don't know if I love it or hate it.
I actually gave it a 7.5 on the balance, which is higher than any of the individual categories. But I think it's actually quite nicely balanced. It's nicely balanced for what it is, which is a cocktail with a really good backbone, a whiskey with a really good backbone, but with like no accoutrements. Like it is like a solid high-ish proof whiskey with no flavor. And it's kind of that throughout the whole experience. So I was like, you know what? If this is your thing, it does that pretty well. So that was a 7.5 for me. And then we get to value. Now, Brad, you've already kind of tipped your hand a little bit about value. In the state of Ohio, this is selling for $57 a bottle. It's a little bit cheaper out of state, like in non-price controlled regions. At 57, this is probably going to be my lowest score. I think this is only like a 5.5 for me, Brad. It's a cool bottle, but the whiskey inside of it, it's non-age stated. It's not purported to be any older than like 5 years. Some people are arguing that it's like 8 to 10 year. I don't think that's true. And I just don't think that like at 94 proof that there's really anything that you're paying for here to justify $57 outside of the bottle.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10, actually, for value. At almost $60, there's just a lot of other things to spend your money on. I will say, like, this is a fascinating whiskey. I think it's very interesting, and it deserves some level of buzz around people loving and hating it. But overall, like, I'm coming to a 32 out of 50. Like, it's not my favorite whiskey. It is not bad. It's well made. It's definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Mm-hmm. If I had to guess, I would imagine that like 25 to 30% of people who drink this actually really like it.
I'm at a 33 out of 50, so I'm really close to you. And for the second week in a row, I'm going to say, buy the Noah's Mill, which is almost the exact same price, and a whiskey that I truly love, and just water it down to 94 proof, because I think it's better than this. And so, like, that doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement. We're coming to a 32.5 out of 50, or 65 out of 100. We're just below the 35 out of 50 threshold, where we usually start recommending stuff. I'm not going to recommend this, but it's not because I'm opposed to it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like people are going to see that we said, we don't recommend Willett Pot Still, and they'll be like, aha, I knew it, but like, it's fine. It's a fine whiskey. I think the big differentiation point for me is the price. Like, if it was cheaper, I'd probably tip into the 35 range.
Yeah, honestly, if it was $10 cheaper, like if this was like a $45 to $50 whiskey, I'd say, yeah, this is a really unique and interesting whiskey for under $50. Mm-hmm. But 50 definitely is a wall when it comes to purchasing whiskey, that I have to really like something to spend over half of $100 on it. So yeah, I'm just going to go buy a bottle of Quinta Reuben or Wild Turkey Rare Breed at this point over something like this.
All right, man. Well, we're going to leave Willett Pot Still behind us. We're going to get back into talking about Independence Day, the greatest film ever made. What do you say?
Obviously. Yeah, I'm ready, dude. Let's get to it.
All right, that was Willett Pot Still Reserve. Brad, I'm not going to do any fancy segues. I'm going to ask you this. Should we finish talking about the movie and then do 2 facts and a falsehood, or should we keep the people in suspense and do our game?
Let's do our game, Bob. They deserve to linger a little longer.
All right, well, that means it is time for 2 facts and a falsehood.
Brad is going to try to stump you, Bob, to our right. And what is wrong? 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 facts and a falsehood is the part of the show where Brad presents me with 3 items as fact about the making of this movie, one of which is a complete lie and fabrication, and I have to annihilate it the way that the aliens tried to annihilate us in this film. Brad, I am sitting pretty. I think I'm at like 6-2 on the season.
Yeah, you're nailing it, man. How are we 8 movies in?
Well, this is movie 9.
Yeah, that's insane.
I know, man. It's crazy. I'm not really worried about whether I win or lose today, Brad. I am in a position of pompousness today.
Yeah.
So
pompousness.
Pomposity. So hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1, filming took place in the summer of 1995, and unexpectedly, production was delayed for a few days when filming in the Los Angeles airport because it had a bomb threat from none other than the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. Fact number 2, the production team came up with 2 primary designs for the large alien warships, and director Roland Emmerich liked them both so much that he decided to keep them, one becoming the massive warships scattered across the planet, and the other becoming the mothership that Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum had to fly into. Fact number 3, Will Smith's line while dragging the alien back to the base, "What the hell is that smell?" was completely unscripted. The Great Salt Lake Flats, where the scene was shot, has an issue where when the wind is just right, it can kick up the smell of millions of decaying brine shrimp from the nearby lake.
Ew. Brad, these are 3 really good facts and or made up facts because they all sound pretty reasonable. I'm going to be honest with you, dude. I think that the design of both the little alien fighter jets and the city-wide size ships are really, really cool. I have always hated the design of the mothership. It looks like a big flea. Like it's just floating through space with its little legs. I don't like it. So I kind of want number 2 to be false. Just because I want to shit on that a little bit. Number 3, see, I don't know. Would Will Smith have been improvising? I don't know. Brad, you got me today.
I got you, man.
I'm going to say one is...
Do you think that Ted Kaczynski was threatening the Los Angeles airport?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. He was threatening a lot of people. I think that one sounds the most plausible. I think 1 is a fact, just because it is... Like, why would you make up a fact about the Unabomber? It has nothing to do with this movie. So it's either 2 or 3, and it just depends on, did Will Smith improvise? I'm going to say 2 is the falsehood, Brad, but I think you might have gotten me today.
Bob, you are on a hell of a roll. Like America in Independence Day, you are firing on all cylinders.
Oh, it was 2?
It was 2.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the falsehood.
Man.
Yeah, so apparently the lakes have all of these like brine shrimp that like live in the lakes, but as they die, they decay into like the silt. And if the wind hits just wrong, it like just spreads this reeking smell. And Will Smith had no idea about it. And he just, on one of the takes as he's dragging this alien across the salt flats, he just casually goes, "What the hell is that smell?"
That's so funny, man.
As a more serious question to somebody. And they were like, "Oh, this is perfect. Let's keep that in there."
All right, man. Let's get back into talking about the movie itself. So there's a fade in on July 4th after Mommy's sleeping now, okay? And we're back at it. Everyone has been emotionally devastated. Jeff Goldblum is drinking himself into a stupor because he doesn't care anymore and the world's going to end. And then Judd Hirsch comes in and says like, "Oh, you're going to catch cold down there." And he goes, "Wait, say that again." I hate when characters do this, but he does the "say that again." What? Yep. You're going to catch cold? He goes, "Yes." Like, okay. and we are off on a mission to infect the light years traveling alien mothership with a virus from Windows 95.
Yep.
And boy, oh boy, if there's anything 90s about this movie, it is the idea that, no one knows what antivirus software is yet.
Yep.
And
definitely not the aliens.
Definitely not the aliens. They don't need that stuff, man. So, okay, I want to talk about that plot line and get your thoughts on that, because there is good stuff that happens on July 4th, but there's also like, look, it's a movie about aliens attacking Earth, and even I was like, this is implausible. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's that element of you set your heroes up with an impossible task, and then you give them a way to accomplish the task. Mm-hmm. The key in any film is, whether it's, Lord of the Rings, Frodo being able to throw the ring into Mount Doom, whether it's Star Wars, them able to blow up the Death Star, like, the way in which they defeat the impossible odds has to feel plausible. Like it came about in this moment of ingenuity. And at the end of the day, like, to believe even that the initial premise, they use radio communication that we could hack into, is ridiculous. Like, they flat out say these aliens communicate through like psychic means.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for some reason they're transmitting radio broadcasts. And not only are they doing that, we can like reverse engineer it to destroy their shields. Okay. Okay. Yeah, these super psychic, like world destroying aliens who have destroyed thousands of worlds beforehand also rely on radio technology. Got it. Sure. Yep.
I mean, have you also considered that these are not Americans, and so they're just not as intelligent as we are?
That's true. I hadn't thought about that before,
I mean,
Bob.
that's the message of the film here, Brad.
Although, like, wouldn't they have been the Americans of their original planet?
I believe they're the British of their original planet.
Oh, obviously.
All right, here's another nitpick, now that we're talking about the plausibility of this alien movie. You know how, like, the ships always position themselves directly over their target, and the target is, like, in the dead center of where this ship is, because it has this laser beam that comes down. At the end of the film, the ship has moved to, like, directly over this military base that all of our heroes are far underground in. And then they blow the ship up, and the ship falls to Earth. Like, you're still very much trapped there, right? Like, I don't know. How do you get out of that situation?
No, they're totally fine, Bob. Don't think about it. I totally didn't think about it myself. That question never came up
one time.
It's very obvious that they're going to be just fine. Honestly, as they blew it up the final time, I thought that they were going to do like some sort of like, it just like implodes on itself and burns up into nothingness. But no, they show it falling to the ground. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Why not?
So the climax of this movie is what I am going to refer to as a double Star Wars. And this is after a guy we follow on YouTube, Brad, named Ryan George, who does the pitch meetings. He had this extended thing in the Top Gun Maverick pitch meeting where he talks about how they have to do a Star Wars because the end of the movie is just A New Hope.
Yes.
And this movie, we're doing a double Star Wars. We have Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith going into the mothership to upload a virus, and they have to get back out and then blow the ship up. And on Earth, you have the president of the United States saying, hey, I'm going to go fly this mission to blow up this big citywide destroyer. And so they're doing a Star Wars because they have to find, the equivalent of like the vent hole from A New Hope. And it's freaking great, man. The end of the movie is so preposterous, and I love it so, so much. And it all kicks off when Bill Pullman has his presidential moment. And I had the text of this speech pulled up. I'm not going to say it. But when my guy goes into like second gear and he's like, Independence Day, July 4th will no longer be an American holiday, but it will be a holiday where like the whole world says, and then he just kicks it up a notch and he does, we will not go quietly into the night. And I'm like, dude, I was like, yes. Like, I have seen this movie 35 times, and my wife is sitting across the room from me, and she's like, I've never seen this. And I said, you came in at the perfect time, because America is about to kick so much ass.
You don't need to know anything that has
else
happened previously.
And I realized halfway through this speech that it is so moving that I was like tearing up as an American.
Yeah.
And my wife notices me having an emotional response to Bill Pullman's alien speech. And I'm going to be honest with you, I am not ashamed. It is so good, Brad.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, as I was doing my research for Two Facts and a Falsehood, the crew, weirdly, this feels strange, they weren't actually instructed to applaud at the end of the speech. It was supposed to be, like, in the script, it was just a, like, go back to work, maybe a little more energized. They actually just spontaneously burst into applause as the speech ended. And for good reason, because Bill Pullman was half dead throughout the film. And he comes to freaking life and just delivers an incredible speech here.
It's so good. And I love that at that part of the movie, too, they're like, we don't have enough people to fly planes. Anyone who thinks they can fly a plane now. And then they like cut to the crowd of people he's talking to, and it looks like the production team just went into like every bar in the area and pulled guys out. But like it works so well for what they're trying to do, because like that's what America looks like. Let's be honest here. Like there's just scraggly looking dudes with beards, and then Bill Pullman gives them this speech, and they're all drunk, and they all immediately burst into cheers. It's incredible.
And Randy Quaid is picked a hell of a day to quit drinking.
Okay, man, before we get into our last segment of the day, I want you to give me 30 seconds on the last 30 minutes of the movie. How does it work for you? What holds up? What doesn't hold up? Is it the best part of the movie or no?
Oh, there's elements of it that are great. The speech is great. I think the final shot of the alien ship getting blown up is great. I think that the tension of it as it like opens up and starts to shoot its giant laser beam is great. But overall, I think that they struggle a lot from the CG of the day, for the fact that I kept, and this was kind of my note throughout all of the technical aspects of the film, every time they had a scene of like a space ship attacking the F-16s or, you know, getting into dogfights, whatever, I just kept thinking to myself, man, Star Wars did this better in 77. Like Return of the Jedi did this better, and that was like over a decade before this. And I think that was my big issue. I just don't think they did the fight scenes very well. And if you're gonna do an alien versus human sci-fi film, you gotta nail the dogfighting. And you have to really nail the feeling of terror as enemy alien ships fill the sky, and I just don't think that they nailed that. So that's my biggest letdown for the end of the film.
You don't like it when Bill Pullman says, "Come on, boys, let's plow the road," and then they just start firing machine guns? It's great, dude. I just don't think you're a lover of cinema, I think is what we're finding out today.
I don't think I am. I hate it. That's why I've been doing this podcast for so long.
All right, man. It's time for our last segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, I have not given 1 second's thought to this, so I'm going to let you go first.
I actually have what I think to be a absolute perfect pairing for this movie. It is another film that has preposterous battles, really terrible dialogue, many not memorable characters, and just some kick-ass fight scenes. I am going to recommend 2013's Pacific Rim. Because that would just be the most humans are the best and everybody else can go kick rocks movie pairing that I could imagine.
I have absolutely no idea what to pair this movie with. I think...
Yeah, I mean, do you want some recommendations?
No, I think I'm going to go, and it's like a really lame one, but I'm going to go with Return of the King. I think that's like the obvious one here, because you get...
Whoa. How is Return of the King the obvious pairing?
Here's how it's obvious. It's obvious because there's like two movies that I think of that are also in the like rousing the troops with a speech. And it's Braveheart and it's this. It's Return of the King. I don't really want to rewatch Braveheart anytime soon. It's fine. It's a fine movie. I will also say, if I can give one really hot take, I think this is a better speech than William Wallace's speech in Braveheart.
Oh,
And here's why. William Wallace's speech is like maybe 3 sentences long. We just the way he delivers, "They may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom," is a great line reading. The speech as a whole, not persuasive. I'm not, if you break it down on a literary level, I think Bill Pullman wins the day. And that's why Aragorn gets my nod, because he does a great job with his speech. And also, we get to watch, horrific looking creatures fall at the hands of man. And I'm cool with it, dude. So Return of the King is my pick.
Anytime you have to start a sentence with, it's obvious because it clearly isn't obvious.
It's obvious to everyone but you, Brad.
Perhaps. Oh, man, Bob. I'm ready to give this movie a final score. I don't know if you're going to be happy with this. I liked this movie, but I very much so did not love this movie.
Sure.
I came to like a 6.5 out of 10 here.
I think that's kind of like objectively how good this movie is. I am both operating from a place of I saw this as an American child in the 90s.
Yeah, you did.
And also, like, I kind of want to give it a 7. I'm not going to give it a 7.5 to fudge the numbers here, but I will give it a 7 because last week we both gave Goldeneye a 7. And, like, Goldeneye may or may not have more filmmaking merits than this movie, but I think, like, the action sequences are incredibly well done in this film. And I'm just being frank, I had a way better time watching this movie than I had watching Goldeneye. Like, Goldeneye really had some serious whiplash tonally throughout the film.
Yeah, but did this movie have a tank? I don't think this movie had a tank, Bob.
That's true. They are at least each other's equivalent. So I'm going to give this a 7. You gave it a 6.5. That takes us to a 6.75 on what is known around the world as the greatest film ever made. So it's pretty hot take from us today.
Yeah, it's the BFI top film, Sight and Sound. It's it was at the number 1 of the is it the AFI
yes,
top 100?
Yeah,
number 1.
Dethroned Citizen Kane.
Yeah, it sure did.
All right, we want to know what you think of Independence Day. Have you watched it as an adult? Have you watched it recently? Have you been able to take off your childhood, child of the 90s glasses to watch this movie? You can find us on all of our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, at Film Whiskey.
Or you can jump onto the Discord. We are on there every single day talking to you guys, fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. If you'd like to join the conversation, there's a link to our Discord at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, Brad, we are staying in the Will Smith camp to watch a movie that has really grown in people's estimations over recent years. And, crucially, a film that is like 98 minutes long. And that is
let's go.
1997's Men in Black.
98 falls within the 90-minute film, right?
I think so. It's a rounding error.
Let's go.
All right. Join us for Men in Black next week. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.